Okay, I'd like to call the meeting to order. First, we'll do roll call. I believe everyone is here, but just checking. Mr. Garber, you're online, correct? Hello, Mr. Garber.
He's connected. He's still muted, though.
Okay.
But he's on call.
And Mr. Maris? Mr. Maris, are you out there? Figuratively, literally.
Yeah, he unmuted for a second.
So, Mr. Maris, you're there? Okay. I assume at this point, then, Mr. Garber is not here?
Yeah, he is online.
I'm here.
Okay, all right, good. Okay, now we'll proceed with the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, I'd like to announce that the board met immediately prior to this meeting tonight for a twofold purpose, actually maybe a threefold purpose. We had an update on contract negotiations, an information session on some legal topics, an exec session on a personnel legal matter with it. And with that then, next thing will be a motion, please, to approve the agenda incorporating additions and deletions for tonight.
So moved.
Thank you. Mrs. Johnson, second.
I'll second that.
Any discussion? Okay. All those in favor? And Mr. Marison, thumbs up or something? And Mr. Garber?
Mr. Garber raised his hand. Mr. Maris has not said anything yet.
Okay. Well, at this point, yeah, we're going to go motion carries 8-0 at that. And next will be approval of the minutes for the school board meeting, the last school board meeting on March 12th, the Education Programs, Policy, Personnel, and Legal Committee meeting held on March 21st, and the Buildings and Grounds and Finance Committee meeting held on March 26th. Could I have a motion to approve all those minutes, please?
Motion.
Thank you, Mrs. Brady. And a second, please?
Second.
Thank you, Mrs. Johnson.
Mr. Donato, I believe there was an issue on one of them. I made a motion which failed for want of a second, and I do not see that on.
Are we talking about the education?
I think it was Finance and Buildings and Grounds.
Okay, let me get up.
And I forget what it was. I think it was one of the contracts that we wanted to move forward with, and I thought we should just immediately authorize it, but everyone else wanted to wait until tonight. If I see it, let me just look at tonight's contract.
Would that be removal of the, because I think the only one we had discussion about was the underground oil tanks, if I remember correctly.
Which one was it, Mr. Donato?
The removal of the storage, the oil tanks from LPC and LMS. Oh, no, that was finished.
Does anyone remember who was here?
Yeah.
Mr. Keener, was it the Gaga pit?
Pardon me?
It was the Gaga,
Gaga
pit.
pit.
The Gaga pit?
Yes.
That's what it was.
Yes, it was accepting the donation.
Yes.
I made a motion to accept it. Thank you, Mrs. Hall.
Thanks.
And that I do not believe is reflected on the minutes. So that needs to be added.
Can we get that added to the minutes and
And Mrs. Drivers, I had asked, I think, who takes the minutes at that one? Mrs. Rhodes?
No, Mrs. Park.
So we'll have to go back.
Mrs. Park. I'll have her fix them.
Okay.
So do we have to withdraw the motion?
No, I didn't.
then-
But it still needs to be reflected in the minutes.
No, I understand that, but we can't approve the minutes if they're not correct.
Exactly.
So do we need to withdraw the motion,
Can we
which
approve them
covers
with that
all of these
correction,
minutes.
pending that correction?
I think that would work.
Yeah. Anyone object to approving it with the correction to add that Mr. Keener made a motion that wasn't seconded to just approve the
Failed for
East
one
Pete
of the seconds.
Gaga pit that night? Okay, if everyone's okay with that, then we'll go on with the vote. All those in favor? Opposed?
This is Charles, I'm good.
Okay, everyone's, so motion carries 9-0. And with that, then, we'll go on to turn it over to Mr. Romersky for.
Thank you and good evening. Great to see everyone. Thanks for coming out. Tonight, as we start for the recognitions, we're going to start with student recognitions. Although we are pleased to honor Andre and Everett for their outstanding work and being able to go to the PMEA All-State Concert Band, they are unable to be here tonight due to other commitments, but we wanted to just recognize them, thank them and congratulate them for all of their outstanding work. So Andre Hurst and Everett Roy. We will make sure we get over to the high school to be able to congratulate them and see them and congratulate them on their wonderful accomplishments. And also, I'm sorry?
And just to add to this, just because Andre's a neighbor, I believe it happens rarely to qualify for the All-State Band. You can only do that your sophomore, from what I've been told, sophomore, junior, and senior year, and he made it all 3 years to All-State Band.
Yeah, and so to add there, Andre and Everett both were selected for the 2024 PMEA All-State Concert Band during the PMEA, the Pennsylvania Music Education Association Region 5 Festival at the beginning of March. It was Everett's first selection in All-State, and he'll play the French horn in the ensemble in Erie in mid-April, which is actually happening next week. Andre will join him playing the clarinet. This is actually Andre's third selection for the All-State, a recognition achieved only by a handful of students in the history of Hempfield, so that's a wonderful accomplishment. Also with that, and recognizing the two of them, although we have no individual students who qualified for the All-State Choir this year, our entire chamber singer choir was selected to perform at the PMEA annual conference, which will be held in Erie next week. I will actually be going with them to introduce them prior to their taking the stage in front of all music educators from across the state and being able to watch their performance as well. So that's happening next week. So another great accomplishment of our students. And then also tonight, from a student council standpoint, we have Lauren as our vice president of the student council. So Lauren, I'm going to start with you and turn it over.
Thank you. So recently we've been working on getting the spring shebang together, which was today, and we decided this year to do a rock, paper, scissors tournament with the entire school. So it was kind of last minute, and we had the idea from a long time ago, but we didn't really follow up with it. But I think it still went really well. I heard a lot of great feedback, and like from the people around me, I heard like great things about it, and it really helped to like bring the mood up and get people excited for the spring shebang at the end of the day. So I'd say it was a very successful first year at our rock, paper, scissors tournament, and we hope to do it again in following years. Also recently was the solar eclipse, and I just wanted to mention a big thank you for getting like all the sunglasses for the students. I think they really enjoyed going out to see the solar eclipse without damaging their eyes. I like, even just like from my perspective going home, I saw like so many students get off the bus and they like got their sunglasses out and was looking at the eclipse to see it, and they were all just like so excited, and it was really nice to see. We just have one last thing. We recently had elections for the new student council officers next year. We haven't entirely finished yet, but we should have the full set of officers for the next school year by our next meeting, and Avery will hopefully introduce them formally to you. So, yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank
Any
you.
other additions? No. Any other comments, questions?
Ms. Joy, you're still waiting for mail-in ballot, so what's going on there?
So we try to have at least 2 people run for each position, so that we are able to like have like a choice in our elections. and unfortunately, we only had one person running for vice president. So we do have the results for all the other positions, but we're waiting till the next Win 5 meeting to get that position elected for and run for. So it should be very soon, but we'll get to that by the next time. So,
Thank you.
thank you.
Thank you, Lauren, for speaking and sharing those pieces. As Lauren noted, today was the spring shebang at the high school. Out at the track, it was originally supposed to be tomorrow, but due to the weather forecast, they made a quick change, and so there was a lot of great help from the high school staff and maintenance team, everybody involved to do a real quick switch to make it happen today, so it wasn't have to be postponed, and it was a great event. We were at the track today. And then Lauren also referenced the solar eclipse, so I'll tackle that now instead of in my superintendent's report. But just a huge thank you right out of the gate to Heather Smyrda, a middle school science teacher over at LMS, who started back in the fall and emailed me and said, hey, like, this is gonna be a great event. Is there any way we can figure out a way to get glasses for students? And we worked with our Hempfield Foundation, and the Hempfield Foundation supported getting glasses for all students and all staff. And it provided a really safe but great educational opportunity for our staff. Heather and other staff members created wonderful documents for teachers, and we were able to send that all out. And yesterday, it was a little cloudy, but there were peaks of sunshine, and it was amazing when the clouds kind of moved and that sun really shined bright. The excitement from the kids when they were actually able to see it firsthand was just absolutely wonderful. And I was over with Mrs. Burkholder at LIC when the sun peeked through. We were at the middle school. They were at the track. It was pretty cloudy for them, but on the way back from the middle school, it opened up for the high school kids during dismissal. And just our baseball team was playing Cedar Crest, and both teams got together on the field and put the glasses on and looked together. And then when we got back to this building, we could see out in the distance LPC, the students were out on the blacktop in the playground, and we could hear them cheering over here with just excitement. So it was really a great educational opportunity for our kids, and just really thankful for the Hempfield Foundation for getting behind it so early on and having everything ready, and the glasses, and our staff for being willing to provide that opportunity for our kids. It won't happen again for another 20 years, but it was a great experience and hopefully some great memories for our kids. So thank you for that. And with that, Mr. Dono, I'll turn it back to you for residents' requests.
The board provides a time of public comment for residents and taxpayers to bring their thoughts to the board, but it is not a time for exchange between the board administration and the speaker. We ask that the speakers refrain from identifying specific students, staff, or community members by name. Residents and taxpayers who are interested in making public comments must complete the electronic registration form prior to 3 p.m. on the day of the meeting. We have 6 requests to address the board this evening.
Our first speaker this evening is Caleb Best, who will be followed by Jennifer Meyer.
And up on the speakers will be the clock for the 5 minutes.
Good evening. Tonight I wish to address the board regarding the ELA pilot as well as the budget discussions from last month's Finance and Building and Ground Committee meetings. I probably won't make it through all my comments, so I'm going to email them to you, and I hope that you review them all the way through. Last month, a board member said that Hempfield needs to cut the, quote, shiny new things to balance the budget. I wish to know what this board believes is shiny or new. Is it the obsolete paging system that requires eBay to keep us running? Is it the $34.8 million of priority 1 and 2 needs in the K-8 buildings that some board members have claimed do not actually need to be done? Is it the supplies that the administration has indicated will be cut since there is nothing else left to cut? Do you think those supplies won't be needed? This is just one more thing that our teachers will end up paying for out of their own pockets, or will be asking families to donate. Maybe the board will recommend that next year, along with the food collection drive with the Hempfield Foundation, we can ask families to donate reams of paper, toner cartridges, and other supplies, because this board is unwilling to make the hard choices to keep this district running. Costs keep rising. It's a fact of life. Taxes must rise with it. You cannot continue to trim the fat because at this point, you're striking bone. The constant delay on large projects is costing our district literally hundreds of thousands of dollars. For example, the ELA curriculum. If the board had approved Wit and Wisdom last year when the district originally recommended it, the district's out-of-pocket cost would have been approximately $727,000. Assuming the board approves the Wit and Wisdom tonight, which I strongly recommend you do, the district's out-of-pocket cost is $1.1 million, which is a difference of $394,000. In last month's Building and Ground Finance meeting, a board member balked at the mere $70,000, comparing to that $394,000, for the replacement of the paging system across multiple buildings, only half of which would be quote-unquote down the drain when the possible high school renovation or rebuild occurs. What happens in the meantime if that paging system fails during an emergency instead of just a facility hold, which is bad enough? What if, God forbid, there is an active shooter event? Several board members suggested last month that a backup system or plan should be in place, to which I wholeheartedly agree. However, how is that going to be accomplished if you won't even pay to replace the primary system, let alone add the requested backup system? The list goes on and has been for years as this board has fought the administration to squeeze every last hour out of each of the systems in this district. I'm honestly concerned about the increased risks to our students if this board does not get their act together and start approving the district to fix things. While no one likes to have their taxes raised, there are some of us who realize that A, it isn't as bad as you're making it out to be, and B, both the district and the taxpayers will be much worse off if you refuse to invest in our schools now and keep kicking the can down the road. And as a brief aside, if our district begins to suffer, our property values will suffer as well, since it will be harder to find people willing to move into our boundaries. Even those without kids in the district will pay the penalty of letting our district fail. Regarding point A, per the budget presentation last month, raising taxes the full Act 1 index allowed would result in an increase to the median household of $220 per year. This is only $18 per month. I certainly don't know everyone's circumstances in the district, but it seems to me that most families in the median range could afford an increase that small. As a reminder, that means that exactly 50% of the district would pay less than the $18 per month. I'm sure the administration can give you the full range of tax increases from the lowest valued home to the largest. However, as an example, for a home assessed at $100,000, which, while difficult to find, does exist in our district, the tax bill would increase a mere $111 per year, which is less than $10 per month. For those of you concerned for our seniors on a, quote, fixed income, I will remind you that the Social Security Administration applied an 8.7% cost of living adjustment in '23 and another 3.2% adjustment this year. Overall, if you look at the historic rates for the last 10 years, you will see that Hempfield has been much less than increases in Social Security payments, the Consumer Price Index, and the Act 1 base index. Base, not the adjusted index. Even if the district applied the full adjusted Act 1 index of 6.3% this year, our compounded increases over the last 10 years would still be 20% less than the compounded SSA increases over the same time frame. Please review the email that...
Thank you.
Thank you.
Jennifer Meyer will be followed by Jean Pretz.
Hi, thank you. My name is Jen Meyer. I'm the mom of two little girls, a first and second grader at LPC. They were here at the very beginning of the meeting. Mom and Dad, we had a bit of a overlap to get the kids tonight. But they have both been using Wit and Wisdom, and that's what I wanted to talk with you about today. So as a mom of two little girls, I have personally had I've had a personal experience with Wit and Wisdom. My kids have reading homework almost every night, and as you probably know or remember, when your kids are that little, they're reading to you and you're actively involved in the homework process. I also come into the classrooms as a volunteer classroom aide about once a month to help with the guided reading program, and I'm familiar with the program from that angle too. And from my personal experience, I'm very happy with the Wit and Wisdom program. I think it's awesome. The reason I'm talking to you though is that at the last special committee meeting, I was listening on Zoom, and there were a couple individual members, board members, who were saying they had some negative personal experience with Wit and Wisdom. And you know, they kept talking about this negative, they've done their own stuff and have negative personal experience. And so I guess we're sitting here saying, well, whose personal experience should we take? Should we take mine? as a taxpayer and mom and a scientist, or should we take the board members? And the answer really respectively is neither, right? We should be looking at the data. So in addition to being a mom and a board member of the PTO, I'm also a scientist. I'm a faculty member at Harrisburg University of Science and Technology. I used to be a faculty member at Virginia Tech, so unrelated to Wit and Wisdom, but please upgrade your systems because it's really scary when you think about it. I'm talking from personal experience. But back to Wit and Wisdom, thinking about the data clearly show that the parents who couldn't be here tonight to talk to you because they've got kids at home, the kids who absolutely would not sit still for this meeting, my daughters are like, when can we go, Mom? The teachers who are not working tonight and hopefully enjoying some time off, when surveyed, the parents overwhelmingly loved Wit and Wisdom. The teachers overwhelmingly loved Wit and Wisdom. The reading specialists, the students, when also asked age-appropriate questions, loved Wit and Wisdom. Overwhelmingly, this seems to be the program we should adopt. And in addition to that, it's the more cost-effective option. So the reason I'm spending 3 or 4 minutes of your time is because I get really concerned when board members hold out and say, for personal reasons, for personal experience, I don't think we should adopt this. And I'm really asking for you, please, to be clear on your personal experience. I was really clear with my homework and the visitors thing. But then beyond that, recognize that's just a sample size of one, and rather than going with a very small sample size of your own personal experience, go with the data that you directed the district to do some research. They did that research diligently, they did it well, and the result is rather clear. So as with all things, one would hope you don't vote your personal opinion, but rather vote what's best for our district. Thank you very much.
I did get a message Jean Pretz was unable to speak, just making sure she's not here. Our next speaker is Lisa Colino, who will be followed by Michael McGovern.
Hi, good evening, school board members and community. My name is Lisa Colino.
Ms. Colino, could you adjust the microphone down just to perfect?
Sure.
Just so like,
I know I'm
yeah.
short, sorry. My name is Lisa Colino. I am a parent of 2 boys, one of which was a 23 Hempfield graduate. My other son, my younger son, is a 10th grade student at a local private school, but attended Hempfield K-5. In addition to being a parent and a member of the Hempfield community, I am a current teacher in a neighboring school district, and this is my 26th year of teaching. So much has changed in education in just a few short years, and I feel as though I have sat back for way too long watching hardworking teachers, guidance counselors, nurses, speech therapists, PTs, OTs, paraprofessionals, and our administration of this school district suffer from continuous name-calling, backlash, criticism for jobs that many hold master's degrees and doctorates. I am fully aware of what speaking out like this can do. I'm hoping that I can be a voice for those who are unable or feel as though they cannot. I've witnessed repeated ridicule of online trolls, bullies who make public comments that are hurtful and then hide behind First Amendment or suggest that they're merely just having tough conversations. To all these people who spin a false narrative because they think they can save education, have no idea what the day in the life of an educator is like. Not only does the staff in our schools carry the weight of the world on their shoulders, in addition to teaching their content, they have families too. We have students who have lost family members, who have faced addiction, hunger, poverty, and other obstacles. Our job as public educators is to teach all students who walk through our doors. We do not get to decide based on beliefs. And juggling all of this is way more than just a full-time job. Tonight, I urge the community and members of this board to listen to the professionals and support them. Provide them with the curriculum that they have piloted and recommended. Allow for additional professional development. Purchase materials. And in turn, this is going to give consistency across grade levels and benefit all of the students at Hempfield. These educators come to work each and every day with the best intentions, and they're crushing it. They deserve to be respected and compensated for their dedication to a very worthy profession. Thank you.
Michael McGovern will be followed by Aaron Small.
Hi, my name is Michael McGovern, and I'm here to talk to you about the teachers tonight. Before I talk to you about the teachers, though, one, I'm really nervous, so I apologize. And two, you need to know a little bit about me before we talk about the teachers. I'm from Montana, and you guys, I'm so sorry. My husband's ex-military. We moved from Montana because he worked on the missile bases and got accepted to Penn State. When he graduated, we moved to Malvern because he got hired by Vanguard. And then we were looking for a house there, and we couldn't find one. Not one that fit our needs, within our budget, and with the school district, because you guys know those three things are everything. And it just so happened that my husband's childhood best friend called him up and said, hey, I live right by Farmdale. The house next door is for sale. You want to come look at it? So we made the over hour and a half commute to go look at the house. It fit our needs, it fit our price budget, and they told us it's in a really great school district. At the time, I was pregnant with my first of 4 children. When we bought that house, we did not intend to stay here. We intended to sell the house in a good school district, make more money, go back to the Malvern area with more money in our pocket so we would be closer to my husband's job. What happened was Farmdale. And I mean this from the bottom of my heart, you guys. I would not be in this community without that school. I'm from Montana. I have no family here. And those teachers, they step up. Where I lack, they're there. I'm an avid reader. Sidebar, go books, woohoo. I'm an avid reader, but it is hard to teach your kids how to read when you don't know what you're doing. My mom wasn't here to help me with my babies. It's those teachers that stepped in. Farmdale is the reason my kids can read. It's the reason that they can do math better than me. And it is the reason that they are kind. Those teachers show up every day, and they put their best foot forward. And if at any time I ever thought, oh, God, it's just their job, COVID pushed in and said, oh, Michael, no. Here's a reminder on how hard it is to be a teacher. And then, on top of that, I had all 4 in school at the same time. Let me tell you, if my teachers want a margarita bar on top next to the pool on the roof of the school, I will PTA that like there's no tomorrow. I mean that seriously. They deserve everything. And it's not because they're teachers, and it's not because they're teaching my kids, although that does mean everything. It's because they show up every day when I can't do it, and they bring their best self. And you guys, we as a community, as a taxpayer, as a mother, we need to support them. We need to be like, what do you need? Do you need that margarita machine? Okay. I know I'm being silly, but I really mean that. Because I need those men and women, not just any men and women. We can get a warm body. A warm body will make do. But the teachers that Hempfield has, and I'm in Landisville and Farmdale, they're amazing, you guys. Like, I really mean that. I'm not just saying it because, but I mean it. I've got a kid who is, has an IEP, and they have prepared him for the next steps. And when I thought I was doing that as a mother, they came in and they taught him more strategies. They taught him how to express himself. They taught him things that I was missing. If my family had been around, they would have said, Michael, are you thinking about this? My school did that. And I will forever be indebted to them for that. So I'm asking the board from the bottom of my heart, please make sure that we're taking care of our teachers. Because as a community, you guys know that they are the lifeblood of our community. And without our particular teachers, you guys, we're not going to be as good as we can be. And we're pretty darn good. We can always be better. There's always room for better. But right now, we're in such like they're just coming back from COVID. We're just getting our stride. I want to let you know that you have my permission to take care of our teachers. Please. Thank you.
And our final speaker, Aaron Small.
Good evening. I'm here again to talk about public education funding. I sent each and one of you a copy of a resolution, which I'm going to read from tonight. And my ask tonight is that I would like you to consider adding that resolution to an upcoming agenda and adopting it as a board. Doing that would send the message to local representatives that fixing the inequitable, inadequate, and unconstitutional system of funding schools in the state of Pennsylvania is a priority for Hempfield. If, as I have heard discussed, we must start making hard decisions that might involve cutting staff, cutting programming, not investing in needed repairs or renovations for our facilities, why is it that we are not seeking out every avenue of funding, including from the state? So if you care, as I know you do, about keeping our taxes low for our local residents, please make it known that you do not favor over-relying on local tax increases to meet that gap between district needs and existing revenue. This resolution is a tangible way for you to advocate for our district's needs. I'm going to read some of the sections from this resolution. Pennsylvania's Commonwealth Court on February 7th, 2023 found that our current system for funding public schools is unconstitutional, failing to fulfill the Pennsylvania Constitution's promise of a thorough and efficient system of public education. The court found that education is a fundamental right. The court found that school districts which struggle to raise enough revenue through local taxes to cover the needs of their students lack the inputs that are essential elements of a thorough and efficient system of public education. Adequate funding, courses, curriculum, and other programs that prepare students to be college and career ready. Sufficient, qualified, and effective staff, safe and adequate facilities, and modern quality instrumentalities of learning. The court found that money does matter. Pennsylvania school districts are collectively underfunded by $5.4 billion, and the Basic Education Funding Commission proposed that the state should provide $5.1 billion to close this gap in the next 7 years. Governor Shapiro's 24-25 budget endorses the work of the commission and fulfills the first year of the commission's 7-year plan with $1.1 billion in an increase in basic education funding. All school districts, not just the poorest, not just the urban school district, all school districts, including Hempfield, will materially benefit from the governor's proposal and the adoption of a plan to provide for it to continue for 7 years until funding deficiencies identified by the commission are overcome. Every community should have enough funding to serve their students, regardless of wealth. Underfunding is a statewide problem in Pennsylvania. Only statewide action can reduce the deep disparities in educational resources that define our school funding system. The time is now to take action for our children and for Pennsylvania's future. Thank you.
Thank you to all the residents that spoke, and Farmdale principal. I'm sure you can relay what happened tonight. You should be proud of yourself and your staff, those comments. Yeah, yes. You probably have to speak in the speaker, oh, sorry. Or you have to speak in your teacher voice. Can you do that? Okay.
Mr. Donovan, we do have people listening remotely.
That's
so
true.
She
So
probably,
yes, you will have to. Thank you, Mr. Peter. I forgot about that. So you could speak in your teacher voice up there.
Okay, thank you. I will not take long. I want to tell the backstory on Michael McGovern. Michael McGovern has been a very faithful volunteer in our schools. She is the parent of 4 children. She works tirelessly supporting all of us, and it takes an effort of all of you, of our entire district. Like, it is a fabulous place because of people that Michael spoke about, but including herself, and she didn't tell you about that. During COVID, we had a really hard time when we were returning getting building aids. Michael is a professional. She's a hardworking woman outside of school. She owns her own company. She volunteered as a building aide every single day during our lunch and recess time. She loved it so much, and she wanted to be a part of us, that she applied for a position and is paid as a building aide today. She helped us recruit building aides, so we have what we call our Fab 5, actually 4, but we have a volunteer that comes. We need to thank everybody who participates in supporting our school district. I am very proud, Mr. Donato. I'm proud of Michael. I'm proud of all of our teachers, our faculty and staff. I'm proud to be a resident in Hempfield. You know, there's a lot of negative things that we hear, and I just need to tell you that I am blessed to work in this district and work with these people, and I thank all of you very much. But you deserve kudos. You are amazing. You are quite a leader. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I'll turn it back to Mr. Brewerski for the superintendent's report.
Thank you. I shared a few things already from a district update standpoint, so I'm not going to repeat those. One last piece before I jump into the presentation that I was asked to put together. In terms of the end of this month, kicks off dance theater. So at the end of the month, the last Thursday in the month, will be our senior preview night. That we will have, that'll be the final dress rehearsal, and then dance theater begins that Friday after. So I know you've received information over the last several weeks in terms of access to tickets. So we hope you can join us for dance theater. This is the 40th anniversary of dance theater. So it's definitely a long-standing tradition within the district, and quite unique that we offer this compared to some other districts. So with that, I have for you a presentation on public school funding. So I was asked to bring information back to you regarding the Fair Funding Commission and the work that was done over a long period of time after the ruling in the courts. And so you heard a little bit about it tonight, as well as at a prior meeting. So I'm going to just go through the slide. A couple things I'm going to hit on. I decided to go back, and I was a little more intrigued in this in terms of historical components to school funding. And I'll hit a little bit about the basic education funding in general, and then talk about the commission and the 2 reports, and then where things stand at this point. So next slide, please. All right, so from a constitutional standpoint, one of the main requirements of the Pennsylvania Constitution is that the General Assembly must provide for the maintenance and support of an efficient public education system. I've heard legislators talk at times that this is one of their main constitutional requirements that is actually outlined in the Pennsylvania Constitution. Next slide, please. So back in 1776, that was actually, it was required for the establishment of schools in each county in the Commonwealth. You know, we talked through about the first reference to free public education. We know Thaddeus Stevens. If you've been in education for any given time, you know, it is said that Thaddeus Stevens in 1834 basically kind of saved the notion of free public education in the Commonwealth. But in 1835, which is actually fascinating, the funding formula was actually enacted, and it was based on the number of taxable inhabitants in a county. And that's how the state then funded education. Ironically, through 1835 to 1897, the county superintendents at the time continued to complain about the method because they thought it was not equitable, and it favored more populated areas in wealthy counties. Fast forward to today, next slide. Where we're at, in 2015, there was legislation regarding a basic education funding commission. While that funding commission was enacted in 2015, it wasn't until 2016 that the General Assembly actually enacted the formula that was recommended at the time. And that formula uses various student-based weights and district-level factors to determine what was perceived and what they believe is the fair share, if you will, of the funds that the General Assembly will distribute through that formula. And that formula is what drives how much dollars that every school district in Pennsylvania receives. Now, the original Basic Education Funding Commission's formula was in effect for 8 fiscal years with only some minor adjustments through that time period. Let's go to the next slide. This is that funding formula. I'm not going into in depth on that. I'm not going into individual boxes because every box has a specific requirement, a specific weight, and at the end of that formula is what the districts get year by year in terms of the basic education funding that is issued from the General Assembly. Now, through that process over the years, districts will and have seen and continue to see fluctuations of each of those areas, whether it's around poverty, whether it's around median household income, et cetera. And so over time, it wasn't until the 90s that they instituted what they call hold harmless. And hold harmless is that notion that recognizing there's changes in individual communities and counties, school districts relied on state dollars. Well, if they continue to fluctuate based on the demographics within their community, there was a possibility that schools would end up losing money and not being able to be sustainable to provide that education. So that hold harmless notion came into play where districts would not receive less dollars than they did prior years. And so that really kind of gets that hold harmless idea in play. And there are some districts across the state where if that hold harmless was not in place, then there would be significant concerns as to whether they'd be able to maintain the type of schooling that they currently provide. Go to the next slide, please. And there's just a historical look, and over the years there's been some different terminology that's been used, but what we refer to as those base funds is kind of connects back to that notion of that hold harmless, so what you've gotten year after year. In 2015-16, you see a little bit of green there when they instituted that formula that went into play. So then the sense that new money was driven in through the formula, so districts got their base and then some additional funds through a new formula. And that continued over time, and you start to see the little increments going up, and that was when the General Assembly would determine if there was additional dollars being put into the state budget for education purposes. 2021, you see the freeze there. We all know what happened in that time period. No need to go back in history. But you then start to see in 21-22 a little sliver of yellow for 2 consecutive years. And that's what they call the level up funding. And that was additional funds to help kind of close that gap as a result of what occurred during COVID and in some cases prior. So they had really 3 layers of dollars. You had your base dollar, you had the level up funding, which some districts received and some districts didn't. And then you also have then the funding formula where it was, new money was driven into that. And then you see then in 23-24 how that kind of shift from the level up to a larger percentage was driven in through the new funding formula. But they still work to maintain that notion of hold harmless. Go to the next slide. This is our breakdown, and I think this is an important piece to look at because every school district in the state, their chart, if it was to have identical charts, would look different. And that's solely based on the tax base within each district. That's what the local is. And so this goes all the way back to 13-14. So we historically are in about that, when you look at an 11-year average, about 71%, almost 72% of our dollars that fund the Hempfield School District come from local tax dollars. The state has contributed historically over 11 years about 26%. Federal government, when we look at things in terms of IDEA and some federal programming, it's just a little under 2%. And then that other funding coming in through additional resource, additional revenue coming in through the district. But when you look at those 3 pockets of dollars, whether it's the local, the state, or the federal, that's basically how school districts are funded in the state of Pennsylvania. Now, every district, though, that percentage is going to look different. You have districts where they have a low tax base or not a strong tax base, and they're heavily reliant on other areas, and There are some districts that get a lot more federal funding than others. But for us, I think it's important to take a look at, again, that 70%, 71% over 11 years is the average, coming in with regards to the local revenue. Next slide, please. Again, I'm going to come back to the state's constitution is that the General Assembly provides for that thorough and efficient system, which then, if you move to the next slide, is where we are today. The William Penn School District, as well as 5 other school districts, 4 parents, and 2 statewide organizations sued the Department of Education, General Assembly, et cetera. And through that Commonwealth Court case, the Judge Jubileer there ruled, you heard it earlier, that it was basically the state has failed to uphold their constitutional requirements of how they fund education in a thorough and efficient system. Now, that ruling that was issued did not go forward or did not roll out how schools should be funded. It was just determined that it was unconstitutional and that they needed to, basically the General Assembly, then needed to work with the school districts, the governor's office, et cetera, as to how we should fund schools in a fair and equitable way. So they charged, the General Assembly then charged the Basic Education Funding Commission to work through this process and gave them a very tight timeline to come up with recommendations being made back to the General Assembly. So this commission, if you go to the next slide, Act 51 of 2014 actually had the composition of the commission outlined, and so they adhered to those requirements of Act 51. There were 15 members that were designated from the General Assembly, or their designees could be part of it. Those 15 members held 13 public hearings. All the testimonies and everything submitted is available on their website. I have that website there for everyone to review. All of that work occurred from June of 23 through December of 23, and then they had till mid-January of 24 to issue their report. And what occurred with the Funding Commission was there were 2 reports issued. And it's noted as the majority and the minority report because when you look at the 15 members, an odd number, therefore we have politics coming into play, and so you had 8 members of one party, 7 members of another party. So the first report, the majority report that was adopted by the commission, was voted on by a vote of 8-7. However, it is important to note that while that was the majority report that was adopted by a majority of the commission, there is no legal requirement to implement it. It was simply to provide recommendations back to the General Assembly, who has to then determine how they're going to fund it. The minority report, while it was not adopted by the commission, it was voted on, and the vote there was 6-6, and there were 3 abstentions. So that did not pass. Next slide. So I'm just going to talk through a few of the pieces of both reports. So I'm going to start with the minority report. It did not pass. One of the things that it was suggested in this report was that one of the recommendations was to reset the stable base, meaning focus on that hold harmless. Let's refocus, let's reset that, and determine what's really appropriate funding for all schools. They also suggested looking at the data points. So the American Community Survey, known as the ACS, poverty data that's looked at. Currently, they look at a 5-year span for that. They suggested looking at it as a 3-year span because that will help adjust for the impact of communities and the economic need within communities rather than looking at it over 5 years. They did suggest to revise the funding formula. However, within their report, there were no charts provided or there was no real direct reference as to their recommendation for how much dollars schools should get. And instead, what they shared was that each district would receive basically what they got in 23-24 and some kind of prorated share of any new funding determined by the funding distribution factor that they set out in their new formula. But they did specifically note that within that report that the 4 prior education commissions did not recommend any specific funding amounts. Therefore, they felt it was important to follow what the previous funding commissions did, and that's why there were no charts or no direct findings, if you will, as to how much schools should receive in terms of the funding. If you look at the next slide, I know it's a little blurry, it's a little small, there was nothing else we could do with this, so if you really want to see this formula, I advise you to click on the Basic Funding Commission link. This presentation will be live tomorrow morning. You can go to the website and you can actually look at both reports. It's embedded within one of the reports, but when we screenshot it to capture it and you make it larger, it gets blurry. But basically, if you take what I had shared previously, the many boxes and the weighted formulas, this is what they would recommend as the new distribution formula.
Mr. Borowski, the acute poverty weight and poverty weight, does that the same as free and reduced lunch, or is it some other metric? Because if it's free and reduced lunch, we would be considered a poverty district. It's,
So
well,
they-
I'm sorry, no,
no,
that's just the multiplier.
They look at, that's a multiplier, and they look at multiple factors. It's not just free and reduced, they also look at economic need within the community.
Okay.
But when you look at that particular formula, you definitely see up there, you have acute poverty weight over the number of students in acute poverty, the number of students in poverty, so they're trying to break down the different levels there. And so they're giving you a different weight depending on the poverty level. So they have to look at not only the free and reduced, but also kind of that economic need. And if you recall, all of you I'm sure do, within our school community, we now have free lunches for all students, not only free breakfast, because if you look at the larger need within the communities, all of our schools have over 25% of a need from an economic standpoint. So we would see different levels there depending on the pockets within a community, but you have to look at the income ratio to determine that level
Okay,
of need.
so it's factors just beyond free and reduced.
yeah.
It's a much more granular analysis.
That's my understanding.
Okay, thank you.
But I claim I'm not an expert in this. But that's my understanding. If you go to the next slide, this comes back to the majority report that was adopted. But again, there's no requirement to implement. So what this report and this group talked about was reducing the volatility in the basic ed formula, meaning let's look at using 3-year averages. You saw a similarity there from the minority report, sticking to that 3-year because that, for certain data elements, because that'll provide kind of the best indicator of what's really happening within your community. They also looked at providing at least $200 million increase through the updated formula each year. They looked at calculating adequacy targets for each district, and the way they did the adequacy targets is they looked at all the school districts across the state of Pennsylvania, and they identified key factors to try and identify what they determined as model districts. And happy to report, we were identified as a model district. And so our weighted dollar per student was around $12,000 and change. And what they did then is they looked at, through a formula, all of the model districts that were identified across the state of Pennsylvania, and they determined their weighted spend on students. They averaged it out, and the dollar value there was over $13,000 and change. And so if a district was spending less per student, they filled in what they call that adequacy gap, and that's that additional dollars that they're looking to build in, because they're saying districts should spend at least X as a fair number, if you will, for all students. And whether it's because of tax base, whether it's because of a variety of factors, if you aren't able to spend that, we need to get you up there so that everyone is spending at least at that average. If you're spending more, that's okay. You get either less or no additional adequacy funding. And that additional target funding would be present for 7 years, if approved and if implemented. And for us, the differential there is about $1.3 million, and I have another slide to get to. They looked at reconstituting the next Basic Education Funding Commission in 2029. So again, it's trying to stay on schedule, looking at every 5 years. This report did provide data tables. And so the next data table that I'm going to show actually shows all the school districts in the state of Pennsylvania. You can see, I'm sorry, this one's actually going to show just the schools in the county. If you go into the report, you can see every school district in the state of Pennsylvania, not only whether or not they were identified as a model district and whether they met the targets or not, as well as how much each district would get. So if you go to the next slide, what you see there is basically the breakdown of the proposed fair funding formula increase of the $200 million. What they would look at, we would be getting a proportion of that, and so our proportion based on formula was about $477,000 and change. That proposed adequacy supplement is what I referenced when they talked about identifying the model districts. Having the model district and spend, we spent less than what they said should be spent on students when they look at average of schools. So that differential for us was another $1.3 million. So when you look at the 1.348 and the 477, you're at about $1.8 million increase that's proposed coming to us as a school district. So that's about 11% increase in our state funding than we've received in the past. And so our new proposed basic education funding is around $18 million. And so again, if you take off that 1.8, then we're back in that 16 and change range. You see with that expenditure of the Basic Education Funding Commission weighted student count, we are at the 58th percentile. We spent $12,734 based on the Funding Commission's. And then our local weighted capacity based on percentile and student rank, we are on the 80th percentile there. One piece that they also factored in at the end was a tax supplement, and you see for Hempfield we are 0. And that's because we have a strong tax base, and because our tax base is strong enough that it's sustainable if they were to provide extra funding, the thought being we could scale back tax increases and still make strong economic gains in our community. So we don't receive any additional tax supplement. You do see some other districts there that get additional funding, but again, that has to do with their tax base.
I think that is fascinating, the adequacy and equity charts, because it very clearly shows the issue that we've all talked about, where you look around the county, you look at Columbia and SDOL, is they are very, their expenditures per students are in line with ours, their capacity is low, and their effort is very high. Like they're tapped out, basically.
Right, correct.
Whereas we're not. Hempfield, Manhattan Township, we have a little bit more capacity, untapped capacity there. It's some interesting math.
Yeah. So when we look at this in the two reports, if you go to the next slide, here's where the dilemma is in the state of Pennsylvania. Whether it's today, whether it's because of the lawsuit, whether it's back in 1835, we're in the same boat we've been in and continue to be in unless there are changes with regards to how schools are funded in the state of Pennsylvania. So it is important to note that there are no requirements of the General Assembly to implement the Commission's recommendations. We have a Democratic-controlled House, we have a Republican-controlled Senate. There is disagreement in Harrisburg as to how to spend the additional rainy day funds. And the rainy day fund is where a lot of the additional funds that one of the groups is recommending that the state takes those dollars from. However, the other group is saying, in a sense, not so fast, because we can't take all of those resources away and deplete it all at once. What are we going to do when the money's gone? And so it's the debate back towards how do we fund public schools. However, both parties agree, whether you talk to Democratic legislators or Republican legislators, that something has to be done to fund appropriately and invest in public education. So that's good news. The challenge is there is really, even though they're statutorily required to pass their budget by June 30th, there's no teeth to it whatsoever. And they know this, they recognize it, they do talk about it. There's discussion and intent about trying to get it done by June 30th. However, if you talk to both groups now, we heard that initially there was a push to try and get it done. We don't expect anything to be settled prior to June 30th, which is really difficult then from schools from a budgeting standpoint, because we have the same obligation that they do by passing a budget and approving it by June 30th. However, there's significant teeth involved if we don't pass our budget by June 30th. We must, because of taxing authority purposes. And if we don't, then we have the state coming in and we have all kinds of issues that we have to work through for not fulfilling our requirement to pass our budget. So historically, and we've talked about this in meetings, we do not budget for any additional state funds from a prior year. We flat fund it. So what we got the prior year is what we budget for the current year. So while it would be nice at this time of the year to know if we were getting additional state funds, we don't. And we won't know probably for a while. So the question then comes, all of this work was done, then for what purpose? What do we do now? And so it really comes down to needing to have conversations with legislators around getting the work done in terms of funding public education. So from a district standpoint, I know some of you were with me. We were at a legislative breakfast, and we heard about this, and there was a conference call or a webinar about this report that some of you are on. Opportunities to talk to our local legislators is important, so I encourage you all to do that. In my role as superintendent, and also I'm the legislative liaison for our county in terms of the Pennsylvania School Administrators Association, so I will be up at Capitol Hill on April 30th, engaging discussion with our legislators around this particular topic as well as other topics. But when you have opportunities to engage with our local legislators around school funding and trying to get something done, this is an important topic. Within this topic, and while it's not in this presentation, the same other areas apply in terms of a flat rate for cyber charter students, as opposed to a fixed rate by each individual district, because every district's different and it doesn't cost what it would cost us to fund a student in school here versus going to a cyber charter. That's a good topic to also talk about with local legislators. So I was asked to bring this forward just to kind of give you a brief overview of this particular topic. So with that, I believe that's the last slide. Any questions? Anything else that you would like from me on this topic?
Since I'm the one that asked for it, I appreciate it all. But I guess the next step, I feel, for our board is because, I mean, you kept saying it, there's no teeth in it, they don't have to, figure this out. There's nothing holding them accountable. I think as a public school board, that's our job. And I think it's even more powerful collectively doing it than individually doing it. I've shared a little about resolutions to some board members, and I think it's really imperative that we work together as a public school board to say, this is what we want, because our local, Hempfield's local taxpayers will carry that burden. And we're asking for you at the state level to do your job and help fund us. So, I mean, I really think collectively that's a message we all need to send. I mean, and you just hit on a couple of the things like the charter school reform. And I would love to see from our administration the things that Hempfield, like those flat rate charter things and the things that we see as important being put in that resolution, and all of us collectively signing it and saying, now get to work for Hempfield. Because I'm, like a lot of people, tired of always putting it on the local taxpayers. So I don't know. I just think because there are no teeth in it, that's our job to try to garner support for the report and have them work for us instead of us always saying, oh, we don't know what's going to happen. So, I don't know.
I'd agree with that. I think there is power in every individual contacting, but when a whole group comes together and says, as a whole, we feel this is what's best for our district, for our taxpayers, for our students, for our teachers, and you are our representative, that does have some power and some teeth. And I don't know, I think it would be hard to say we don't want to have that extra money from the state. It would be really, really hard to say I'm not in favor of them fixing the system and actually doing something. They've been told it's unconstitutional as it stands. So something must happen, except there's no directive on how to do that. We need to be that directive to say, here's the recommendations, we are in favor of this, our district needs this, as every district does, but we're working for our district.
I don't know how that happens because I don't know the rules or if you can draft it as an administration, the things that would help us here locally in Hempfield. And then we can decide we can vote on it. I don't know how it works.
Yep, I can get things to Mr. Donato and Mr. Wagner to review and share with the board. And then it would be up to the board to decide if they want to pursue that or not.
I think there's some urgency and timing on this as well to get it through, and in the hands of whoever needs to see it, our representatives at the state level, so that they can act on it in a timely manner. So, yeah, as soon as possible.
I don't have any objection to what's been talked about. However, I would want to more intimately understand where that funding for the state is coming from, because the dollars will come from Pennsylvania. And so where are they getting that funding from? Or is this additional funds that are, slush fund, for lack of a better term? Or is that going to result in some form of taxation? So I just want to understand more of the backside of some of these bills and some of these things, which I'll take responsibility to look into. But I think if we can have discussion around that, if we're considering some kind of resolution, it is important to understand what's happening on the backside of that as well.
Yeah, the dollars at this point would be from the rainy day fund. And then once, the question is when they're gone, then what? Especially, is there a true commitment for that 7-year piece? Recognizing that year after year, the General Assembly has to determine how much is going to go in, because they can't necessarily commit all those dollars for 7 consecutive years without legislative action on the front end.
Would that include not just doing it year by year, and there's been like a 3-year span, sort of planning ahead? Could that be something that's part of our resolution as well? Because I've heard talk of that.
Yeah, you have the ability from a resolution standpoint to add in very specific things, because it's basically what you as a board
I don't know
would
if there's
support and would ask of our legislature.
I don't know if there's support for that, but that would do that kind of long-term planning that we keep wishing every year we had, and wish we had, prior to the June 30th that, we're always looking for, because our budget has to be in prior to that. I think that's like you said, since 1835.
I appreciate your point, Mr. Bremersky, about the rainy day fund. One of the things that I always look at is long-term. What happens when that rainy day fund runs out? Is there a cliff there? And who absorbs that responsibility when the cliff hits? So I'm not opposed to something like that, but looking long-term, there needs to be an understanding. Do we get comfortable with those dollars? Then we hit a cliff, then we have a tax index, and oops, we're in some trouble. So I just want to be careful that whatever we put out there makes sense, not just for today, but also long-term.
Right, and I think it's also important that regardless of what comes, if there's whatever additional funds would come, certainly be thankful and welcome that. But in order for that to sustain, then how are we going to make sure that that additional revenue is, in a sense, coming year after year? Because you will have a natural cliff. It will end at some point unless there's a legislative commitment to actually continuing that funding. And if not, you're going to experience what occurred many, many years ago when the state stopped having districts contribute at the PSERS rate, and they dropped it, and districts didn't contribute, and then they came back up, and they said, now what do? We need more dollars. Same thing would happen here. And same thing we're talking about even on the buildings.
And with the ESSER funds, is a good
Correct.
example of that, where we had to plan for that to go away.
Correct. And so you have to intentionally build in the incremental revenue increases to be able to maintain that moving forward on a long-term financial commitment. So,
I think, I'm sorry. As I understand the ask is that we vote in favor of a resolution that was attached to Mrs. Small's email earlier today.
I have other.
Is that, I just want to
No.
I have other versions of resolutions, and I wanted.
I'm sorry?
I said I have other versions of resolutions, and I'm asking the administration, since they know specifically Hempfield, what are the main things that would benefit us? Like, I know we've talked about like the charter school thing a lot, so it can be as specific or as not specific as we please. Right. I think I'm looking more for standing up for Hempfield taxpayers, local taxpayers, so they don't.
I just want to make sure that we're not rushing headlong into putting something on our agenda that probably inserts us in a phase that we don't want to be inserted into right now.
I want to insert myself in supporting Hempfield School District. So I think as a new board member, that was something that I wanted to task myself with right away, and it's in a policy that we signed tonight that we're going to garner support and advocate for public schools. So I don't think it's too big of an ask. And I think if it's coming from our administration and specifically what we need as Hempfield, I think that's incredibly important. I think that's something I want people to hear.
I have a question. What are the sources of the other resolution, sample or example resolutions? Are they from
The other sample
PSBA?
resolution,
Where are
I
they
think,
from?
came from PSCA a long time ago, and it's been used for funding before, but
We
it was
will-
just, yeah.
We will pull
I want
and
them,
work
yeah,
on
I want
things to
the
get to Mr.
administration.
Donato, Mr. Wagner for their review and then to distribute to the board. Yep.
Because I want it to be specifically Hempfield's needs and specific to those numbers on that chart, you know.
Yep. All right. Any other questions for me on superintendent's report? Other than the enrollment report, that concludes my report. Mr. Donato.
Thank you. There's no president's report. Moving on to representative and adjunct reports, Lancaster County Career and Technology Center, Mr. Keener.
Thank you, Mr. Donato. The Joint Operating Committee met on March 28th down at Willow Street. I thought probably the most interesting takeaway from this meeting was that the CTC is having ongoing issues with a number of districts not honoring their statutory mandate to share information about student discipline and medical records. And this is an ongoing issue that is, and obviously it's not something I can go into specifics with, but there have been multiple times when districts' failure to honor those obligations have resulted in serious disciplinary and/or medical issues being foisted upon the CTC in a way that they cannot adequately plan for. And it's something that the JOC is going to be looking at to ensure that each of the sending districts are cooperating fully in discharging their statutory obligations. The next JOC meeting will be held on April 25th at Brownstown.
Mr. Keener, just for your information, I actually spoke to Dr. Savin and offered him a solution, and he is exploring it with his team so that sharing of information is also protected from a data privacy standpoint. So
And because Hempfield is not one of the districts that.
No, but we are actually kind of in some ways ahead out there. Mr. Graham, as well as other either chief information officers or tech directors, have been working on data privacy sharing agreements. And there is a very easy way, instead of having to do multiple, to do an add-on amendment at the, or addendum at the end. And if they were to do that, then it would be very easy. The question is whether they're at the point where they have the same type of data privacy capabilities and making sure they're up to date there. But I did share with him kind of that, so he's exploring what we have already worked through, and hopefully that will help him as well as all the districts who are doing it.
I'd be anxious to learn more about that, because I think that it is an issue, and I think my read on it is that you have every district trying to craft agreements that protect the district's interest, which is fine, but which ignore the legal reality that they have to give this information regardless of if there's an agreement or not. And I think that's sort of where the tension is occurring, but I'm glad to hear that there is progress being made.
Very easy solution.
Yeah.
Yep.
Any questions for Mr. Keener? Okay, thank you. IU 13, Mr. Maris.
Nothing new to report.
And I will mention that one of the, which we discussed at the Buildings and Grounds and Finance, one of the things we'll be voting on in financial thing is the IU budget for next year, which Mr. Maris had said is appropriate. So moving on for that, Hempfield Rec Center, Mrs. Brady, or Mr. Wagner.
Mr. Wagner, I forget if actually you were on that call. I know I took that meeting on a call because we were both out of town. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay.
I was unable to make that call due to another.
Oh, so you weren't on, okay.
I was not on it at all, so I had another, actually, school district conflict that night, so I
Okay.
couldn't join.
So I'll just, what I was able to garner from the phone call, actually, as many boards do, there was a long and in-depth discussion about the use of Robert's rules and whether they were being properly applied, as to the whether or not board members could abstain and when. So that was a very long conversation. Other than that, there was continued discussion around the visioning related to their comprehensive plan, analyzing the current strengths and weaknesses, not just of programming, but of buildings and facilities, similar to what we go through here, looking for ways that they can build a synergy with the school district, with local churches and local businesses to the benefit of all involved, and deepening, one big goal was throughout all of this to deepen programming at more of a family level, programming that would be more attractive for families as a group, that they could participate in together. And that's about where it was left.
Okay. Any questions? Okay. Safety and security, Mr. Garber.
Just been talking with the Safety Security Office. They've been sharing some really good feedback on some different initiatives they're doing. So they feel like they're making some really good progress this year.
Okay. Thank you. Questions? Okay. PSBA, Mrs. Eshelman.
Just thanking Mrs. Stribos probably for getting the poster out, and when people are here physically to sign that, to sign to our commitment, the principles of governance and leadership.
Okay. Thank you. Moving on to standing committees, buildings and grounds, Mr. Maris.
Yes, brief review. Mrs. James discussed removal of the underground oil tanks. It was $136,000 less because there was no contaminated soil, so that was a good thing. We had considerable discussion on architect RFP for these opportunities for building renovations, high school and others. That was with Fidavia. Also, Mr. Chris Kelmer from Fidavia talked more about the feasibility study. Mrs. James also just talked about a change order, I believe it was for Mountville, for additional $15,000, and Mountville and Roystown. And then we also talked about, Mrs. James talked about PTO wants to donate a Gaga pit for East Petersburg Elementary School. And that's all I have.
Okay. Thank you. Questions? Okay. Finance, Mr. Wagamuth.
We had a general operating budget proposal from the Lancaster Lebanon IU-13, and as Mr. Donato noted, that is on the agenda tonight for approval. We also had a 24-25 budget update from Mrs. Hall, and just to review the timeline of that, April 30th, the Finance Committee will meet, and the hope is to come away with some kind of a recommendation for a tax increase. May 14th, the board meeting will adopt the resolution, display and advertise the final budget, and then June 11th at the board meeting will adopt the final budget according to the state timelines, if all goes well. And then finally, we'll revisit the paging system on our April 30th meeting related to Mr. Graham's request to consider a replacement of that. And that's all I have.
Okay. Questions? Okay, moving on, education and programs, Mrs. Johnston.
We discussed, Dr. Dandridge presented all of the data that's been collected. He and his staff have done a masterful job of collecting that data, which we requested, by test scores, surveys of students, parents, teachers, reading specialists. The recommendation was to adopt Wit and Wisdom. We did have a robust discussion that evening as well, and tonight later we will be voting on that. I want to thank Dr. Dandridge and Mr. Hoffman and all of the principals and teachers. You put in a lot of hard work in piloting both programs, and I personally really appreciate it. I didn't go to as many classrooms as some of the other board members did, but I was impressed with the teachers, the work they were doing, their interaction with the kids. the way they welcomed us. It's not always easy to have guest, like a board member come into your classroom. So I really appreciate that, and so for the principals that are here, and pass that along, please. Also, I appreciate the community, the parents' input, and also the teachers. They were more than willing to discuss with us, very frankly and openly, pros and cons about what they thought about this, which program was best. And so we will be voting on that tonight. I just want to, again, thank Dr. Dandridge and Mr. Hoffman for pulling all of the data together. We requested that at the end of last year. There were board members who wanted to see data, and you did a great job of collecting data for us. And I really appreciate that, and how you researched other districts where these programs were used as well, and presenting that in an unbiased way. And I have to say, I would ask some principals, just when nobody else was around, tell me what you think, and some would. Dr. Dandridge would never, ever tell me what he thought. So I had no idea. I still don't really know what he thought. I do appreciate that. I'm just nosy enough. I really wanted to know what he thought, but I appreciated that the person who was collecting all the data, analyzing it, was withholding that so that I could be confident that he was doing it in an unbiased way. And I really appreciate that, because I have a lot of bias about what was going on. And so I do appreciate that. So thank you very much for that. And for, is Jason here tonight? And for the work that you did too as well. Just thank you. And for you, military, we're military too. We landed in a good place. We were ROTC final assignment at Millersville. So long time ago, long time ago. So our next meeting, I'm sorry, I don't have a calendar in front of me. If somebody knows, it's on the Thursday.
It's next Thursday.
April 18th, 5 o'clock, right here. Thank you.
Any questions? Okay. Policy, Personnel, and Legal, Mr. Keener.
Thank you, Mr. Donato. The Policy, Personnel, and Legal Committee also met on March 21st. There are, let's see, 4 policies for first reading consideration that we will be voting on tonight: electronic communication equipment and educational opportunity for military children, which is a new policy, and then 2 policies for second reading related to distribution, which refers to the board policy manual, and then the policy related to the district organizational chart. Most of the meeting was spent with a very productive discussion about vaping, particularly in the high school. We were grateful to have several of the student council officers here who provided very helpful feedback. And I think the board, administration, and student leadership had a robust conversation around the issue of vaping in the high school, the upshot of which is that the administration is developing draft policy language for consideration at the May 16th meeting around how do we streamline our treatment of vaping devices, and how do we harmonize them with both our tobacco and drug policies.
Any questions?
I want to add that it was a very eye-opening discussion over the last couple of times, and I've been seeing reports about it on the news, so we were ahead of the curve. But I just really appreciate the high schools, how they've been really proactive, and that they have shared that information with us in a very clear manner.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you. We'll move on to action items. First one is personnel action items, and it goes from 1 to 8 in there. So I'd like a motion to approve that, please.
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Keener.
I'll second that motion.
Thank you. Mr. Wagner, any discussion? Okay, no discussion. All those in favor, show of hands. And
Yes. Mr. Maris,
And I saw
yes vote.
yes for both of them, so motion carries 9-0. Next is the financial items. We're going to do.
Mr. President?
Yes.
I'd just ask that under action, financial action items 10H, that be taken at.
It is second.
Okay.
It is-
Thank you.
We're just going to G. Thank you. Yes, so going back, we're going to motion to approve financial action items B to H, which is the contracts, financial reports for the district, or to G, correct, thank you. Food service financial reports, financial transactions, the donations, and now we'll get the Gaga Pit approved. I believe that's one of the donations, and the IU-13 general operating budget for next year. Motion to approve those.
So moved.
Okay.
Second?
All right. Thank you, Mr. Wagner and Mrs. Johnson, for the second. Any discussion? Okay. All those in favor, show of hands. And
Mr. Maris, yes.
okay, motion carries 9-0. And then finally, for the financial action items, approval of the new ELA program, which is Wit and Wisdom. That's H on there, and there's information there with that.
So moved.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you. Mrs. Johnson and Mrs. Brady seconded. Discussion, questions?
My comment is that my no vote is actually a yes vote for the Savas program, my view, my perspective. So I just want that to be clear. And the rationale behind that, summed up with a lot of reasons behind it, is simply because Savas is a long-standing company that's been around a long time. We have their math program. They're a proven company. They have the resources to advance the program. The My View, My Perspective program, they've already made adjustments to that as recently as January of 2024. And so I believe in the long run, they will be much further ahead than the Wit and Wisdom program. And so the reason for my no vote is not that I don't want an ELA program. It is truly a yes vote for the My View, My Perspective.
Okay. Any other questions, discussions? Okay. All those in favor?
Mr. Maris, yes.
And Mr. Garber has his, and against? Okay, motion carries 8-1. And moving on to other action items. Need an approval for action items B through D, which is Mr. Keener indicated, first reading for the first and second reading for various board policies and additional contracted bus staff people.
Mr. President, before we take action, can I ask that 12B be taken separately? That's, I believe, the board policy on the use of technology.
Sure.
Thank you.
Just make. So you'd like them, because there's actually, there's two policies.
12B.
There's use of electronic communication equipment, policy 006, and policy 254, which is educational opportunities for military.
It's really 006.1.
Okay. Well, then I'll just break those up and we'll just vote separately for those then. Okay. Let's go with, well, let's just start with that then. For policy for B, for policy 006, use of electronic communication equipment.
So moved.
Thank you. Need a second?
Second.
Thank you. Discussion?
I just have to state, and I stated this in the policy committee meeting, that my concern with adopting this policy is not to stifle progressive thinking around the use of technology, but to demonstrate the fact that I believe board members need to be present, and that being present allows for additional engagement. And so I believe this policy fundamentally sets a bad example when it comes to the use of technology and the expectation to be here. I understand the need to be able to participate virtually. However, I believe this just continues to expand the ability for us, our board, to technically not be here at all with no accountability. And when I imagine this at a worst-case scenario, I imagine all of us joining by Zoom to this board meeting, and the fact that we would have residents from the community sitting here, and technically none of us could be here without any accountability around that. So my concern with this policy is, as it was before, that we need to hold ourselves accountable to be physically here.
Any other questions?
Mr. Walkemuth, I appreciate that perspective, and I absolutely agree with you that board members need to make every effort to be here in person as often as possible. But in response to your hypothetical about people talking to an empty room, I would point out that the policy does require that a majority of board members be physically present in order for a board member to attend to electronic meetings.
I just think the policy allows for that to become problematic if, for example, we would have the majority of us decide it was just more convenient to take the meeting from our couch.
That's not convenient for me at all. I have a lot of kids and a lot of animals, so I'll be here.
Any other discussion? Okay, with that, all those in favor?
Mr. Maris, yes.
And against? Okay, I believe that passes 8-1. And then the next policy in that part is Policy 254, Educational Opportunities for Military Children. Motion to approve that.
I'm sorry, point of order, I believe that the motion was simply to pull out
Okay.
B1 so that
So-
by default, B2 is included with everything
Okay,
else.
then we'll go with that along with the second reading of those policies and the additional transportation rec. So B2 through D. Motion to approve those.
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Keener.
Second.
Thank you. Mr. Wagner, any discussion for those? All those in favor?
Mr. Maris, yes.
And motion carries 9-0. And then motion to adjourn, Mr. Maris. Giving you the opportunity.
So moved.
Thank you.
So moved, thank you.
I'll second it.
Thank you. All those in favor? Okay. Motion
In
carries.
favor.
9-0. Thank you. We're adjourned. Have a good evening.